Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a lovely couple of days with Reset Connect. It certainly feels like a good time to be talking about the impact of climate change. For the next hour, we're going to focus on the role of advertising in the transition to a more sustainable future. As we know, it's often a challenging area to navigate, and we don't always get the messaging right. But today we're going to focus on some of the practicalities and the theory involved in the promotion of sustainable choices. And I'm delighted to say that to help us with that, we have our 4 expert panelists who I'll invite to introduce themselves in a moment, covering a range of perspectives, the advertising industry, environmental charity, and academia. Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Whitman. I'm a behavioural economist at the Revolution Plastics Institute at the University of Portsmouth. My research concerns interventions designed to stimulate circular economy consumption, and I also look at interventions which may be derailing that and are sort of supporting the linear economy, and how we can replace the linear one with a circular one.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Dooley, Head of Sustainable Media at JCDecaux UK. If you don't know JCDecaux, we are the world's largest outdoor media owner. We occupy a very kind of unique space within the media landscape. We partner with cities and transport networks around the world and around the UK to provide useful public infrastructure such as bus shelters, public conveniences, bike hire schemes, all paid for through advertising funding, and we also help raise revenue for those partners of ours. So it's a unique business model. We're also, by definition, a very public media channel, which we think comes with certain responsibilities. And in my role, I lead our work with clients and their agencies relating to sustainability in media. And I'm also, relevant to this panel, I've also, for the last couple of years, have been part of an Ad Net Zero work group called Every Brief Counts, which has been developing some theory and launching this week a toolkit to help more advertisers and the wider ecosystem do more brilliant behaviour change-based campaigns.
Gavin.
Hi everyone, I'm Gavin Ellis. I'm co-CEO and co-founder of Hubbub. We're an environmental charity. Our mission is to try to make sustainability second nature. So what that means in practice is that we run projects and campaigns that try to engage people on sustainability issues in a way that make them feel normal, relevant, desirable, interesting, often presenting them and framing them in a way that doesn't necessarily lead with the environment first, even though we are an environmental charity. That doesn't need to be the primary message, because we know that in order to engage the mainstream, the environment isn't always the number one priority. And we run campaigns across a whole range of different topics, from food, circular economy, engaging people on nature, homes and energy, and more.
Thank you. And Fiona?
Hello, I'm Fiona Cooper. I'm the Group Head of Sustainability and Risk at VCCP. For those who don't know VCCP, we're an integrated agency. We are headquartered in London. We work internationally with hubs. There you are. I've already got you. With hubs in New York and in Singapore. We are integrated, so we don't just do advertising. It is that full 360-degree perspective. My role, I've been with the business for 10 years. My background is agencies and management consultancy, and I've often been the CMO in different places as well. So I think I bring a bit of a commercial nous and understanding to the narrative. So yeah, my responsibility and role is really about helping us act as a responsible business and helping our clients, which is often now in terms of reporting and measurement and how that all ladders up and when's the right message and to which audience.
Thank you all. And I'm Justine Grimley. I'm one of the operations managers at the Advertising Standards Authority, the UK ad regulator. And I work with a team that deals exclusively with environmental issues in ad content. Okay, to jump in, Fiona, if I could just come to you first, please. What role would you say that advertising plays in persuading people to make sustainable choices? And we hear a lot about trusting green claims. What does the landscape look like currently, and what should the industry be addressing?
I think we have a huge responsibility. I think when you start to talk about wanting to populate culture and shape culture, it goes with that, the responsibility of how we do it. I would start at the top, which is the sort of macro trend and need for trust. I think in the UK, I think the stats came out from the Edelman Barometer saying that the UK's general population's confidence and trust in institutions is at an all-time low at 39%. It puts us on a par with Japan and Argentina as a developed country in terms of trust. So business, to me, has to step in at that point, and there are expectations where we need to deliver against that role and the responsibility. And when we in the agency, our side, talk about trying to create long-term value, I think my lens on that is sustainable long-term value and doing the right thing. So I think that's the macro context, is that there's a lack of trust going on, which is why it's even more important that every piece of communication is laddering up and adding into that. So I think green messaging has had, on one hand, it's sort of ebbed and flowed. If you looked at COP26, everybody was talking about their big target setting, and it was all very rah, let's go. Then there was a wave of getting caught out because everybody was trying to jump on a bandwagon. I think then there's been a politicization, there's an economic crisis and cost of living pressure that's become a perma pressure. So I think people are now wanting to get on with it in their own way. They expect businesses to behave, and if you don't, it's at your peril because you will be found out. So I think everything to do with any of the comms that we put out has to be laddering back up to the trust and the reputation and that long-term value we're trying to create.
Thank you. And do you think that's what puts people off, Chris? Because research tells us that the proportion of UK ads that contain sustainable messages is low. Why do you think that's the case, and does it matter?
Well, firstly, the proportion of advertising portraying sustainable behaviour is low. Kantar, the research agency, started studying this only a year ago. They looked at 2024 and found that 6% of advertising portrayed as sustainable behaviour. They ran the same research again in April this year, and that number had gone down to 4.5, which is concerning. It marries up with a trend, I would say, I've observed in my sort of 10 plus years dealing with brands and sustainability. There were peaks, I've already mentioned COP and perhaps 10 years ago. But it's declining, and it absolutely matters. It matters because, depending on the study you look at, the government say that 30-odd% of the UK's carbon reduction over the next 25 years is going to have to come about through consumer behaviour change. So the food we eat, the way we travel, the way we heat our homes, those things are actually going to be quite tricky to land with the public. And if advertising is only talking about it 6% of the time, but we're asking people to do it 30% of the time, that's a pretty big gap to try and breach. So it absolutely matters. In terms of the why, I think there's a few reasons. I think firstly, there's the usual kind of fast-paced business cycle. Lots of brands have got quarterly targets to hit and products to launch, and sustainability just drops down the agenda somewhat. I think we'll probably talk a bit more about greenwashing as we go, but that is a phenomenon. There's the ostrich effect of if something just looks a little bit too difficult to get right, or you're worried about being called out or being referred to the ASA, for instance, it just puts brands off, I think, making it look a little bit too difficult to do well, that actually you'll park it and do it later. So yeah, hopefully there are levers that us in the industry can try and pull to sort of reverse that trend, showcase brilliant work, and prove that it does work. And again, the research, Kantar do this research, other people have. Brands with sustainable messaging those campaigns do resonate. They mean a lot to people. People generally do care, and they like it when they see brands that share their values or are credibly trying to do something positive in the world. So it can work. But yeah, I think there's a job to do to try and increase that proportion.
So we know that there's a job to do, Kate, because a lot of us think that we've done our bit by putting the recycling out once a week or whatever. Can advertising help us to make more sustainable choices, would you say, beyond sorting out the rubbish?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there is definitely a lot of work to do. I mean, if you look at many kind of adverts, it generally features, for single-use plastic, it will generally feature kind of a recycling label, and the consumer says, oh, that's good, that's a sustainable product, and it creates a lot of confusion. And of course, recycling compared to the absolute worst behaviour, chucking your rubbish into a river, for example, is a sustainable behaviour. But if we compare it to the kind of the best behaviour, if we're looking at the waste hierarchy of reduce, reuse, recycle, landfill, it is not a particularly sustainable behaviour. And the sort of confusing thing about it is that it is supporting the linear economy, because it is enabling brands to be selling lots of disposable products. They put a recycling label on the advert, and people go, okay, that's fine, I can carry on buying my disposable product. It's recyclable, so there's me kind of doing my green thing. So it creates a lot of confusion. It's supporting the linear economy when really we want to be moving consumers up the waste hierarchy to kind of reduce and reuse. And the other problem with recycling is that people overestimate it as a kind of high impact behavior. When you sort of compare it to things like eating less meat and traveling less aeroplanes and cars, it has very little impact from a carbon emissions point of view, but people really overvalue it. So it's creating confusion there, because people kind of think, oh, it's this brilliant sustainable behavior, when really it has very minimal impact. But even from a waste point of view, it's not particularly efficient. I was the academic partner on the Big Plastic Count, which is this kind of big household plastic counting campaign. And we found that sort of 60% of the plastic from households is just incinerated, where almost 99% of it does feature some sort of recycling labeling. It's and a lot of it's exported as well, and very little of, I think about 17%, is actually kind of mechanically recycled. So there's a lot of kind of misinformation about recycling, and yet it is the main kind of environmental behaviour that consumers hang on to, and that is very much supported by the advertising industry, who like to put it on every single advert. So I think what the advertising industry can do is to create a bit more honesty and transparency with that process, to say that recycling is not the be-all and end-all of sustainability, and actually we want to be reusing packaging if we want to do kind of our bit for resource efficiency.
It's an easy thing to do, isn't it? It's just something that we can do quite easily. Gavin, I saw you nodding along there, and in your intro you mentioned that people don't always make their decisions based on their environmental concerns only. Is it actually true that people, make their choices based on environmental concerns? And what have you seen at Hubbub that has worked in terms of approach?
Yeah, I think it's not that people don't consider the sort of environmental impacts. It's just that it's not necessarily, for most people, the primary concern. And things like cost are a much bigger driver, or health, or even kind of whether it's going to improve their local neighborhood, or these kind of like very personal benefits, I think, are more potent for most people. So that's always been kind of central to the way we've approached things at Hubbub, is not just to lean on the environmental angle, although that's there, and that's important, but to think about what people are interested in, what they're motivated by, what their passions that you can then tap into. I think the other part of this is trust, and Fiona mentioned this. I think trust is hugely important, and yes, institutions are not trusted, or that kind of the level of trust is at an all-time low. But there are people who are trusted, and it's generally it's often the kind of, it's your person on the street, it's your friend, it's your neighbour, it's your colleague. And I think something we're doing a lot of in the last few years is leaning on those kind of much more personal, kind of grassroots stories, like hyper-local people that kind of feel like people that are relatable. And that feels much more powerful than some sort of authority telling you and dictating to you that you should be doing this and you should be doing that. Actually, if you can just show somebody who feels a bit like you doing it, that's a much more powerful message. So that's something that we're leaning on, and we're seeing that. I'm sure others have seen that as well. So I think I would say the thing with the environment point is it's not that people don't care, and I think there's a lot of, there's a kind of myth being perpetuated by certain politicians and certain sections of the media that people don't care anymore about the environment, and it's not true. It's not borne out by the data. They do care and they're willing to act, but it's heavily caveated. They're only willing to act if it's framed in the right way, if it's not just about, well, you do this, and essentially the onus feels like it's been put on the individual or the household or the public to do all the hard work and all the heavy lifting. But if it's presented in a way that feels fair and feels like government and business are doing their bit as well, and if it's presented in a way that feels convenient and it's not going to really put them out too much, a lot of people actually just want to do something, but they don't really know where to start. Like beyond, sort of to your point, like beyond recycling, probably like to do more, but like what can I do? Like, so I think a lot of the role that we try to play at Hubbub and the projects and campaigns that we run is kind of guiding people through that, like hand-holding a little bit. Well, okay, well, recycling's great. How about reuse? Like, what's the next step, and how can you take people on a bit of a journey?
And have you seen some examples of that out in the wild, as it were?
Well, I mean, we're involved in quite a lot of reuse campaigns as well as recycling campaigns, actually. And it's an interesting, reuse is an interesting example of what we call the value action gaps, where people kind of say on paper they really like it, they really want to do it, but when presented with it, often don't in reality. And I think that often comes down to convenience again. It's that, single use and the kind of linear economy that Kate was talking about, it's incredibly convenient. That's sort of the beauty of it in a way, and that's why we all do it. So as much as possible, the alternative has to mimic that, and has to try to match the convenience as much as possible, and it's not always possible, of single use. So that's the thing that we're always really focused on with any reuse project we set up, and the system that we set up is how can you reduce the friction, remove as many of the barriers, because people won't do it just because it's the right thing. Most people won't do it just because it's the right thing to do. They'll do it because it's convenient and because it fits into their day-to-day routines.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And when we talk about advertising of green products, for want of a better word, but they're often seen as sort of alternative products, aren't they? They're something that sets out that's not in the norm. I mean, to all of you, do you think that advertising has a role in making this alternative world more of a normal situation? How do we make this just desirable behaviour for people to follow?
I'll pick that up. I definitely think mainstreaming, basically, the sort of sustainable or responsible messaging is the challenge in hand at the moment, because I don't think people are. I think we've already got the early adopters who are really particularly green. I think people don't want any compromise any longer. I think they do want to care. The Kantar study, Brandsy, came out saying that 93% of consumers globally actually care about this and want to be more sustainable. But I think we as the communicators have to do some of the hard yards and the lifting. I would point to an example from Keep Britain Tidy that we worked with, which was about trying to make sure people didn't just drop their cigarette butts on the ground. People know they're not supposed to. They sometimes do, sometimes don't. As soon as we started to say it's killing the ducks, and we put the pictures of the ducks in there, suddenly everyone took notice. So there's some behavioural science techniques about trying to change it into mainstreaming. And back to the Ad Net Zero example, which is around every brief counts. It's about trying to put, you're cycling, you're not in a car, you're eating plant-based food, it's not meat in the barbecue. I think there's ways in which we can try to seed it and make it feel normal and reflect actually how people are working. I mean, the supermarket is full of aisles with all of that type of food. That is how we're behaving. So we should do it. And I think it's being a bit more conscious in the thinking and into the briefing, and even getting away from the green hushing and actually getting into what is the green briefing. It becomes easier with clients. We have TfL as a client. It's a lot easier when their business strategy is about getting everybody onto public transport and reducing carbon emissions and car use. Your business strategy flows into your marketing strategy and flows into the communications. That's easy. It's also, I would argue, slightly easier if you've got a born green product as well, if they actually want to make that at the forefront of their comms. I think the hard yards now are actually make it work in the right way at the right time with the right audience for different brands, because taking that overt sustainability messaging externally is not always the right thing, and it's when nobody's looking that you should be doing as a business the right thing, because people will find that out if you're not. So yeah, I think we need to change how we communicate and recognise it's not always communication first.
Thanks, Gavin. I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just to sort of build on that point around the behavioural nudges and kind of how you frame it and present it to people. So on the cigarette butts, there's a good example from our work at Hubbub, where we developed something called the ballot bin, which is basically a voting ashtray. So when we first introduced, this was about 10 years ago, when we first introduced it, and we're still selling them now all over the world. But we put them on a street in central London, Villiers Street, just next to Charing Cross Station, if you know it. And it was a very heavily littered street. And we observed that a lot of the litter was cigarettes, and a lot of the cigarette litter came out of pubs, and often people in the pubs were young men watching football. So we developed the voting ashtray. We asked who's the best footballer in the world, Ronaldo or Messi. It meant probably more then than it does now, although they're still both are still in the World Cup. And it worked really well. It worked brilliantly there on the street and people actually using it and reduced cigarette litter, but it also was one of those kind of brilliant moments where it went viral as well. But I think the point about that was we weren't leading with litter. We weren't talking about litter because that was not what the audience were interested in remotely. We led with something that they were interested in. But also we tried to have a little bit of fun with it, like gamify it and have some fun. And I think this is part of the problem that the environmental movement has fallen in, that the sort of trap that the environmental movement has fallen into over the years. We all care passionately about it, but that doesn't mean we have to be really serious about it the whole time. And actually people respond to something that's perhaps a bit more lighthearted and playful and not being kind of lectured at, but actually having a bit of a laugh with it. Where you can. I mean, sometimes it's not appropriate to do that, but where you can. And I think we could do with a little bit more of that still, just that kind of playfulness that people do respond to. There's a lot of doom and gloom in the world. We all feel that. And actually some levity can really help.
Yeah, good point. And I agree. I suppose the regulator in me says, back to the responsibility point, it's difficult. It's a difficult blend to get right, isn't it? Chris, at the ASA, we often hear and we see it's about this sort of responsible messaging point. We see massive claims like environmentally friendly, which are notoriously difficult to substantiate anyway. They're meaningless for consumers, aren't they? We always say that the basis of a claim should be clear, and it's all right to talk about sustainability as a journey. Do you have any good examples that you've seen at JC from campaigns that have done that well?
I think firstly, congratulations on the Green Claims Code, which has done a lot of very important and good work in cleaning up what was becoming a very messy kind of atmosphere with brands, often very well-meaning and intention, calling things green or eco in the vaguest possible ways, which does nobody any benefit in the long term at all. So very important that it's happened. Definitely would agree that it's much, much better to be transparent, to talk about being on a journey. I don't think any brand has necessarily arrived at the perfect position in terms of sustainability in any regard. There are brands who still do use these terms and implement the Green Claims Code, I'd say, very accurately and use very specific claims backed up by science. A few that I'd shout out that I've worked with personally in out of home would be Trainline, Ovo, Oatly, for instance. But they're still the exceptions, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think what we should try and work towards is, for a start, I don't think those really specific claims are going to cut through with the vast majority, this kind of mainstream 80% of the population who want to do the right thing but don't necessarily need to know the carbon footprint of their milk alternative. It's not going to be what sells it to them. I think what we need to work towards is actually having a position where more and more advertising is promoting sustainable behaviour in an unremarkable way. And this comes back to the work that we've done with Ad Net Zero, actually, the Every Brief Counts initiative, which I've been involved with for a couple of years. We've just launched a toolkit this week to mark Climate Action Week. And the principles behind that, we were very much initially at the outset trying to support the creative industry, but just firstly using science-based approach to define and create a hierarchy of sustainable behaviours that should be prioritised. So things like travel and transport, food and diet, heating, over brilliant things like recycling that we may be already doing as well as we're likely to in the current circumstances. So we've got a toolkit which is now available to any of AdNet Zero's 200 plus members. If you're not a member, and particularly if you're a brand or in any way involved in the advertising industry, then what's stopping you? Please do get involved. There's lots of like-minded people and support on offer. And then through AdNet, through that work stream, there was a sort of the gauntlet was thrown down to the media owners, such as ourselves, late last year to try and de-risk investment in sustainable messaging on the part of brands. So for our part at JCDecaux, we created our own incentive for brands to run new campaigns that they hadn't run before. So they couldn't just, as much as we like recycling, they couldn't just dust off something that had already been running in the recent past. It had to promote one of these priority sustainable behaviours, not necessarily overtly, it could be covert, but just at least portraying it. And for our part, we added some value to the media buy. We committed to do research alongside the campaigns as well to prove, as far as we could, that they actually worked. We've done 7 of those in the first half of the year. We've worked with some brilliant brands, IKEA, giffgaff, Carlsberg, Britvic, E.ON Energy, the government, DESNZ as well. So quite a wide range of use cases. The evidence seems to be there as well, by and large. These have been really effective. We've got a couple that I think are being put forward for different awards later this year, which is really, really encouraging. But we just want to see more of it. You know, it's about raising the ambition, and hopefully this will create more proof points that this kind of work is really, really important, that it works as a business message, but it also has a sustainable outcome as well. And, you know, to go back to some of Gavin's points, making this stuff enjoyable, normal, yeah, and attainable and easy.
Thank you. And Fiona, what would you say? Does that speak to the point that you were talking about in terms of how incorporating trust into the messaging as well? I mean, how do brands go about building trust in a message about sustainability instead of invoking skepticism?
Again, it's a bit like the old adage that you don't tell someone I'm funny, you tell them a joke and they decide it for themselves. So I think where we try to help the clients is on that responsible behaviours. The green hushing is going to have passed because, frankly, the train has now left the station. We are all having to report, every business is now having to report where the emissions are across their supply chain. And so even if brands thought sustainability messaging is not really for me, or it's a wee bit too risky, or we've been bitten before, we're just going to keep our head below the parapet, they're not going to be able to any longer. So against the politicization that's happened in some markets, now that the legislation has come in and people are having to report against it, they're going to have to start doing it rather well, because they're going to look at some of their competitors and decide, oh, they're doing that, well, we should do this. And at that point, you then have a better story to tell. So in our world, we try to work with our clients on, for instance, as a supplier, being a better behaved supplier for them. We are measuring all of our productions to try to look at the carbon numbers. We talk about even a return on carbon in terms of a new sort of brand metric, which is building into trust as well. So I think there's a lot of the hard yards is happening behind the scenes, and it takes time. It moves at a very different pace. It involves a whole business to be behind it. Cross-functional teams are a necessity, or you won't get anything through. There's sort of decisions that need to be made about what sort of accreditations you're going to go for, how you're going to report it, because it's important to different audiences. If you're looking for investors, if you're looking for an exit at the end of it, if you're attracting government clients, there's all sorts of different brands. I mean, the juggernaut of, we get one brief and about 20 documents asking about procurement ask, everything from our ISO accreditations through to our IT policy, through to our health and safety policy. Clients are always most worried about what they're most worried about. So for instance, contracts nowadays dealing with big SaaS providers and anything that's based in the cloud, they want to know that we've got very good practices, renewable energy, that our emissions are not above 10% against cloud. Or there's going to be penalties, because that adds and makes their emissions worse. So everybody is going to have to start behaving better. And I think that's a good thing. So I would say the train's left the station. Green hushing is going to go away, because you're going to have to come out and you're going to have to be transparent. And so that, to me, comes right back to being responsible, doing the right thing, even when the doors are closed. Because if you leave a void, it can get filled with the negative stuff. Your own people are your best barometer as well. Again, you don't want people being able to say, well, you're saying one thing and you're doing another. So I'm confident in terms of the fact that trust is going to be the thing that everybody is playing for, but you can't just go out there going, trust me, because that's clearly the thing you wouldn't do.
That's interesting, because certainly at the ASA, we often hear that people feel trapped between green hushing on the one side or greenwashing on the other. And of course, we always say that there's a massive gap in the middle to be filled. But from what you're saying, that the green hushing is likely to be quelled anyway, just naturally through development.
I think it will, and I think some of the green hyper claims were all because everyone was trying to jump on that bandwagon. That bandwagon's finished and gone. The net zero targets near term are around the corner at 2030. Everyone's looking at 2040 or 2050, worst case scenario. You're having to run at that now. So, and there's no hiding from it. And it's certainly absolutely core to how we present to each of our clients. And again, you can't get away with not having this stuff. So you might as well lean in and get to the head of the vehicle rather than it chasing your ass.
Thank you. Kate, but are we in a bit of a dichotomy in that, advertising has typically been seen about encouraging consumption, but can it help to normalise consuming less? And what about reuse and repair? What have you seen through your academic work that speaks to that and the shift from linear to circular consumption habits?
Yeah, it certainly seems like a big shift, doesn't it, for advertising to kind of normalise less consumption. But there are, a couple of examples, and there is a precedent for it for advertising promoting circularity. I mean, the Stanley Quencher cups, that's probably a nice example of advertising through social media influencer marketing, promoting a reusable cup, which is now really popular, and it's not about sustainability. It's about kind of a fashion item and a product that kind of everybody wants. So that's quite a nice example of how circularity can be kind of promoted through advertising. And then historically, I mean, from kind of talking about advertising narratives, there was the kind of make, do and mend, which that's not a line that will probably work nowadays, but in that context at the time, with government and advertising agencies and brands all working together about resource efficiency and product longevity, that was a really strong message, and of course the public got completely on board with that. So, I mean, that's a really kind of lovely kind of idea that everyone is kind of working together for the greater good. Unfortunately, the circular economy, a lot of people might not agree that is kind of the right way to go, and that we should be all about growth and profit making, and there's the difficulty there. But certainly, if it was a joined up approach between advertising, the government and science, I think there is a huge amount of potential for advertising to really promote circularity through narratives as well as products. I think it isn't just going to be about the odd kind of product coming up here and there. It's going to be about the narratives. And then you mentioned kind of academia. So there is a sociologist called Elizabeth Shove who wrote about how advertising has promoted kind of behavioral norms over time, which have then kind of promoted more consumption. So, for example, washing your clothes every single day didn't used to be something that people did 50 years ago, but that's very normalized now, and now that sort of uses lots of energy, which is possibly unnecessary. So there's definitely a precedent that advertising can promote behavioral norms in a kind of linear direction. So, hopefully they can promote them in a kind of circular direction as well.
Chris, sorry, Gavin. Go ahead.
I was just going to come in on that. I think one of the issues that we find, we wrestle with, I'd be interested, Kate, if you have this as well, is some of the language around it can be quite alienating unless you're kind of working in the industry, if you like. And like even reuse as a term just feels really unsatisfactory, but we've certainly never quite managed to find anything that works better. And I think a lot of the public, we've done polling on this, like a lot of the public are quite confused about this stuff. So even, recycled or recyclable, a lot of the public are very confused about the difference between that, never mind starting to talk about things like reuse, like circular economy. Again, is that a term that most people, net zero is a really obvious one. So I think some of the language and terminology that people, that's often used can be quite alienating for people. When we're talking about normalizing it and mainstreaming it, some of that language can be a real barrier, I think. I
was just going to say, actually, going back to Katie's point, one of the brilliant examples of a brand that has normalised circular living for me would be eBay and Love Island and ITV, with an audience that, very mainstream, that I don't think you'd traditionally expect to buy their clothes pre-loved. And just through that really authentic storytelling piece of getting the cast, if you call them cast, the volunteers to wear pre-loved clothing and have that tied into the branding and the sponsorship of the show over a number of years, I just think is really, really powerful in taking that to a much wider audience and normalising it without ever talking about sustainability as a concept. And they did a good job as well of normalising reusable water bottles as well. Who knew Love Island is such a kind of environmental icon? Yeah.
Exactly. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned about understanding terms, and certainly that comes through from some of the research that we've seen. People don't, especially when you're working in this area and you start to make assumptions about what consumers know and what they understand. and we always advise people to take a step back, because probably your audience is definitely not going to understand it as much as you are, if you know what I mean. So that's why it's so important to explain exactly what it is that you're talking about. Otherwise, the message is lost, or it just comes across as too technical and therefore uninteresting. Chris, have you seen some examples of brands that have been able to communicate, that you talked a little bit about the behaviour change that you've been involved in the past, that have communicated honestly and transparently without managing to greenwash?
Yeah, I think I've actually learnt a new term in the last few months to go along with greenwashing, which is green shouting. And I'm going to slightly contradict an earlier answer. I said there's a big opportunity in making sustainable behaviour unremarkable. I think there's also a big opportunity for the brands who are doing the right thing already, and lots of them are, albeit they're not talking about it, to actually start shouting about it, either for the first time or again, but doing it now in an even more credible way, using long-term storytelling, transparency, actual evidence that is genuine but will also make sense to a mainstream audience. There are some really obvious brands who've always done this and continue to do it really well, like Patagonia, Tony's Chocolonely. I think there's some brilliant brands a bit closer to home who are doing this really, really well, like Wild Farmed, Ocean Bottle, Finisterre. I think the challenge there is these are all kind of born green scaling brands.
Yeah.
And I think the opportunity might be for some of the big brands who have been, they will be on a journey, they'll always be on a journey, but they have been doing things really, really brilliantly in-house for a number of years, to actually start showcasing that again, because people do care, and they will start to understand, especially after events like this week, when we were talking as a panel before this, how this heat, maybe for the first time, is actually starting to mess with people's lives.
Yeah.
Schools being cancelled and football matches being delayed and things like that. Maybe these are some of the spurs that, for brands who actually do lean in and start shouting about things, again, there's some rewards to be claimed for that.
Thank you. We're going to open up the floor for questions in just a few minutes, so have a think about anything that you'd like to ask the panel. But before we come to any Q&A, to all of you, and starting with Fiona, if that's all right, what, from your perspective, is advertising's single biggest opportunity to accelerate the transition to a more sustainable future?
I think every single piece of communication has to be considered from that trust lens for me, whether that be consumer, whether it's for investors, whether it's for your B2B. I think it's just really working out who you're saying, what you're saying to whom, but still have that lens of trust. Is it adding up to, and it could be fun and flirty and silly, and that's okay. But again, the influencers you might be using for are going to be genuine and authentic. So I think long-term partnerships are important. If you're going to start shouting, it needs to be coming from the brand and true to the brand, so that people can see the link, and that it's not just a short-term fanfare, because I think people see through that. And also not walking away. There was a certain payments provider who's in the press this morning because they've taken paternity leave down from being actually quite wonderful to being still 6 weeks longer than most people, but they're in the press having done the wrong thing because they had promised one thing, and of course their CEO took 3 months off with their first child. So again, just being really aware, you're not going to get away with that stuff.
Yeah.
That was behind the curtain that probably they weren't expecting to get released. So yeah, I would just say it's a war for trust, and that's where we've got to be heading.
Can I come in on that, on the point of trust? Something we're really proud of as an out-of-home media owner. I mean, we would be, but genuinely, we think what we do is much more trusting. There is a crisis in trust in the media and in society more generally, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. And unfortunately, it's fueled by some of the social platforms, and we know that a huge proportion of the advertising people see is not verified, it's not checked by a human being. It's a pretty murky world, and when you're talking about sustainability in marketing, I mean, more than ever, you need to be trusted. You're making some pretty important claims. They need to actually mean something. There are traditional channels, such as out of home, where you're displaying these messages in public, in a trusted environment, be it a TfL bus shelter or a Network Rail train station, and there is an inherent, albeit probably undetected to most people, there is an inherent trustworthiness in that, because it is public, it's being consumed alongside other members of your community. And that can be really, really powerful if you're trying to promote a sustainability message. And the next iteration of this, we can't have a panel and not talk about AI, I don't think, but there's a whole new challenge, I think, coming with that. It could be an incredible tool to help people live sustainably, obviously the energy challenges aside, but also we're already seeing some cases of very mixed messaging coming from AI in terms of advice to and responses. And as advertising starts to show up on those platforms, do we want it to be another kind of social media where it can be pretty messy and perhaps harmful at worst? Or is there a way of actually putting some guardrails in place that mean that will be inherently trustworthy?
Absolutely. Fiona, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I totally buy into that return to some of the stature, trust awareness stature platforms, be that television, be that posters, be that radio. First of all, they're actually more cost effective. I think the performance marketing bandwagon has been running its course. I think everyone's piled in. The returns are not the same. So I think you're starting to see a reversion back, thankfully, to quality and thinking about what you're doing, when, with whom. And those big high stature platforms, I think, are seeing a new love in. And that's coming even from working with some of the performance brands who are coming up. And then they're starting to buy into TV and posters, having never been able to afford it before. And they're suddenly saying, oh my God, my trust scores are through the roof and I'm getting more money on the platform than I had done when I was only using Instagram. And it's like, well, yes, because it gives people that feeling of security that you could afford to be in those environments. And I'm ready to let rip on AI, so I'll wait though until you're finished and let it go.
Thank you. Gavin, is there anything that you would suggest in terms of advertising and accelerating where we are now into a better place?
I think for me, the broader role of advertising is not to try to make people care, because I think the majority do. I think it's to try to create kind of the enabling environment in terms of the kind of cultural and societal environment where it's kind of normalized, where it's second nature for people, and it's not, it doesn't necessarily have a label. It's not othered in that way. It's just like this is how we do things. I think that's the power, the potential power that advertising has, rather than focusing in on kind of specific products.
Thank you. Kate?
Yeah, I think advertising should do what it does best and sort of fake it till you make it when it comes to the circular economy and kind of showing policymakers that people kind of are interested in this way of consuming. Because one of the things holding policymakers back when it comes to the circular economy is that they think that the public are not interested, they don't want it, they don't like the products, they don't like reusing and repairing things. And that is partly true, but partly because it hasn't been normalized yet. And advertising is really good at normalizing behaviors. And, some of that is kind of fake it before you make it. But that is what advertising does best, and emphasizing information in a way that can kind of create demand and create norms. So I think, if advertising can kind of promote the circular economy in all the ways that it would be wonderful at, then, it would be really kind of useful for policymakers to kind of be bolder with policies and infrastructure and all the things we need to really kind of move the circular economy forward.
Yeah, just to build on that, I totally agree with that, and that last point around like advertising can't do it on its own. It has to be part of the mix with good policy and good infrastructure as well. But then with the role of communications and advertising to normalize it and make people stimulate the demand for it.
Yeah. We call that campaigning platforms for change to reach the policymakers. Of course, we've got a term for it.
Before we jump in on some AI chat, Chris, was there anything that you wanted to add in terms of a single thing that you would suggest that you would like to see advertising do next?
I think Gavin in particular covered it really well, actually. I think the role of advertising in the years ahead is not to make people care, because they do, but it is about normalizing sustainable behavior, making low carbon choices and behavior achievable, attractive, attainable, making sustainable living an upgrade, feeling like an upgrade and not a compromise.
Yeah. So, thinking about AI just for a few minutes before we come to a Q&A, I mean, how do you feel like it's affecting sustainability messaging then? We at the ASA, we use it enormously, but largely on the other side, we are able to spot such a huge scale of not always problems, but usually problems when we're using our AI tools. So from that, it's been a huge benefit to us. Fiona, you mentioned that you had some thoughts on it.
Yes, I mean, as an agency, we early doors in COVID said that we believed in the use of AI responsibly to be creative. So that is the ethos and the manifesto that we still operate under. So initially it was creatives who were starting to work with it, to play with things, to be able to sort of bring it to life before we present a concept to a client, for instance. And then we had the issue of actually going, well, it won't actually be like that, because obviously we pulled on every single resource to show you that. We now need to go off and shoot it. So it helps speed things up. I think the grunt work side is brilliant, and I would say that Michael Lee, who's our head of strategy, sort of talked about, is a Goldilocks equation. What is the right temperature for your use of AI? How much is enough? How much is too little, etc. We've been on a bit of a turbocharge to get everybody using it. So we have Gemini as our platform. Everybody's being encouraged to use it. And I think once you start playing with it, you realize, I would say it's a 75% tool. It can be really helpful. It can be a rider to say that's actually what every other agency is going to do. It's going to be what the client might be thinking already. So it's kind of a useful barometer for us to up the ante and to continue to challenge, because that's what we would want to do. I think it's got some amazing cases. I mean, when you look at research, you can have, I don't know, AI twins that you're playing with and synthetic audiences that you do a sort of, how might this messaging fly or not fly? In terms of dealing with the ASA, we have, a gem where we can kind of run any concept through it initially to see how is it fitting against the broadcast code or not, so we can catch stuff earlier. So there's a huge efficiency drive and consistency in terms of what we're doing, and we have a 7-strong in-house legal team. It doesn't change what they do. It speeds things up. There was the sort of debate around how can we use it, do we use it, what are the issues? We don't want clients to be worried that we're not checking. We're still checking in absolutely the same way, but it gives us another level. Particularly, there's something, I don't know if people have come across dog whistles, where they're icons or images or colors or themes that you might not recognize that have been co-opted for certain organizations that you might not even see. So we're using the tools to help with that. I think it's giving people another arm to be faster and more efficient, but it takes time, and certainly on the creative side, it's another tool, it's the craft to really make it look gorgeous, to make it work. And you can see it in the Super Bowl ads, the ones that are totally shonky are the ones that have actually hired a director to use AI to direct it, and it is another tool to get better at. There is absolutely the issue around water usage, tracking, measuring. That's going to be a big one for next year, I think, around how you measure your AI and you're offsetting it with the ecosystem of everything else, renewable energy, efficiency, every single use and iteration, token-aware optimization and media planning and buying and digital build, that the way you're fundamentally looking at designing workflows is both still inclusive and actually built for efficiency, and that you don't burn through the tokens. And it's very easy to then fly through stuff and realize that actually you should go fresh each time rather than reiterating, because it rescrapes and that uses more carbon. So I think we're excited as an agency. Personally, I love it. It's been an amazing help to give me more time back to focus on the bigger stuff. So I'm pro it, but we're absolutely aware there is a sort of Marmite view on it, and we keep trying and seeing.
I mean, that's been the most incredible advantage, hasn't it? I suppose the worry is it going to rot all of our brains as we go forward, with no one has to think about how
I think that's a good thing, though. The fact is that it's 75% right at best. So, and that's what makes it difficult for the young people coming in, isn't it? Which is, it's about making sure that they can still learn and train. But I'm sure many of the models, the large language models, are good at, they'll tell you why it's against the broadcast code, and they'll give you the link to the bit in the broadcast code. So even the juniors in the legal team are still learning. It's not that it's eradicating there, but yeah, I mean, it's speeding things up, of course. But we are committed to helping also upskill everybody so that nobody feels left behind. If you've got an interest in it, you can apply it and you can start to play with it. And I think that's the thing. I don't know who was it. Can't even remember who said it. I think it's the head of NVIDIA who said it's not AI that'll take your job, it's the person who knows how to apply it that's going to take your job. So I think that's the watch out for everybody.
That's it. And certainly in terms of ad compliance, you can't beat human eyes at the end of the day. That's the way it has to be. I'd just like to open up questions to the floor. Does anyone have anything they'd like to Yes, sir. Oops.
Hello. Brilliant. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much to the panel for those insightful words. I wanted to pick up on a couple of points that were made, I think perhaps by yourself, Gavin. I was involved in a restaurant company a couple of years ago trialing returnable, reusable takeout packaging. And we tried really hard to dress it up, to make it fun and engaging. But I think the cold, hard truth was that when you're competing against the hyper convenience that we've all become conditioned to with single-use plastic, particularly for takeouts, it's just too hard. We even discounted the food, to make it that much easier. But the uptake was so low. And I think whether we like it or not, regulation does have to step in those contexts. And I think a good example is, the supermarket plastic bag charge, which changed our behavior overnight. That was one point. The second was, I think you mentioned the point about the importance of language, and I couldn't agree more. And I think the understanding of language and concepts, which can be quite nebulous in the area. And I think for me and many others that I've spoken with, I think one of the key issues at the root of our conversations is about what does it mean to be sustainable? And I think a logical explanation is that within sustainability, it does have the concept of a threshold, right? Because ultimately, it's your product, service, or business having an overall impact on the environment that is at least neutral or positive. If you're less than neutral, you're harmful. And the reality of our business and economic system, it's sobering to say, but the reality is that the vast majority of businesses are below that threshold and therefore harmful. And then when they do promote an action that they're taking, ultimately what they're saying is they're being less harmful, right? And that's sobering, and we have to be honest about that. It's not that they're sustainable or beyond that threshold.
Yeah, less damaging.
Yeah, maybe take the second point first. I think that the approach that we always take, whether it's with an individual or a household or a business, is like we're not chasing perfection here. It's about doing what you can, and taking those incremental steps, and that collectively will make a big difference. And I think too often, again, the environmental movement has kind of had too high expectations of, certainly of individuals, maybe not of businesses, but certainly of individuals that certain things are off limits, and you have to do, in order to be an environmentally sustainable person, then you have to be doing a whole suite of different things. And we don't take that view. We take the view that life is difficult, life is busy, people have competing priorities, do what you can. And we have confidence that when people start, as we said earlier, like you do one thing, it's likely to lead to another and to lead to another. The point around reuse, yeah, it's really difficult. You're right, legislation is probably the only way that it's really going to happen at scale. I think the other thing I would say is, by the sound of it, you were kind of doing it in isolation with your restaurant, and it doesn't really work when it's kind of diffuse and isolated like that. It works much better when it's part of a kind of concentration of similar schemes. So for example, we ran a scheme last year in Glasgow called Borough Cup, where we brought 50 odd cafes together in the city centre that were all operating the same scheme. You could get your cup from one, you could return it to a different one. Yeah, and I think that's where it has a much higher chance of success. If it's in isolation with all the will in the world, and like you said, even with discounts and everything, it's unlikely to cut through. Yeah.
Thank you. Lady over there.
Thank you, and thank you all for sharing your stories and insights. I'm very curious to hear from the three members of the panel who haven't shared it yet, what your favourite campaign is that has helped drive behaviour change to become more sustainable. I love the Love Island example, it's absolutely brilliant, but I'd love to hear some more.
I did quite like again, it is eBay, but I think eBay and Vogue was the kind of all the front covers of Vogue, and that you can buy all of the clothes in eBay was a really nice campaign. I think it was WPP. I'm not an expert on these things, but I thought that was very nice. And yeah, and I said about the Stanley Quencher Cup as well. I think that's a really nice example of how it's a reusable product, but it is being promoted as a kind of fashion item as well.
Any others?
I mean, I mentioned the the ducks, keep butts clean, which is like getting rid of the cigarette butts. And I don't have any other immediate ones in terms of behavioural change like that, other than I was thinking yesterday I was on a panel where the BBC were talking, and they were saying how mainstreaming things into easy behaviour was things like Stacey Dooley's latest television programme, which is about clearing up your house. It doesn't talk about don't send something to landfill. It's actually a whole programme about it. Whereas, and also Race Across the World, it's not about go slow and take the train on holiday. It's actually a fantastic program where that's naturally what they're doing. So I think that naturalness is brilliant and coming through. But I know I haven't got any other more immediate examples. I'll go into my AI ones.
Chris?
I've got another
Yeah.
or a couple more. So we've been working recently with OVO Energy and the government, DESNZ, on campaigns that use a similar approach, but the campaigns are triggered programmatically by a feed from the National Energy Supply Organisation, NESO. I think that's what it stands for. Definitely NESO. Anyway, so the national grid feed. So if the local energy is particularly low carbon at that time of day, then the campaign will switch on. References the fact that now is a greener time to use energy, or if you have an EV, now might be a great time to charge it, or if you don't have an EV, now might be an even better time to think about getting one. And it seeds that idea, actually, that yes, depending on your tariff, there might be a cheaper time to use energy, but also depending on the conditions, there are also lower carbon, greener times to use energy. So it's a nice meeting of the medium and the message in both of those.
Thank you. We have time for one last quick question. I think the gentleman, did you have your hand up?
Thank you. I'm thinking in relation to the sort of financial mechanism that advertising has been able to introduce recently into paying for how things operate. So obviously Google is the sort of the big one in that, how much money it makes from advertising. And I'm also aware of a product that was sold, or rather given away free, because the entirety was paid for by the advertising that was on the package. So I'm interested in how the advertising opportunity is able to fund the sustainable development opportunities that are out there. Because there doesn't seem to be that. There seems to be, we've got to give money and we've got to do some things good, but people don't seem to get the thing in their hand. I mean, if we could put advertising on a tin of baked beans and give that away free to people who have no food, why are we not doing that?
Just a very quick answer from anyone.
I honestly don't know. I think it's possibly been looked at. I'm sure over the years, lots and lots of different models will have been innovated. I mean, you reminded me a bit of our own business model at JC Decaux and Out of Home. We were founded in France, 1964, by Jean-Claude Decaux. City of Lyon was about to buy itself some new bus shelters at the public expense. Our offer was to pay for and provide the best quality bus shelters possible, more of them than would have otherwise been possible. And it's all paid for by advertising. We have an advertising panel on the bus shelter, but we also split that revenue 50-50 with the council, which is the same business model that caught on really quickly, that we operate now in over 1,000 cities around the world. So that is a product that benefits the public, whether they take it for granted or not, and it's entirely paid for by the provision of advertising.
Thanks very much. And I think we're out of time, unfortunately. But thank you for your questions and thank you for coming along today. It just leaves for me to say thank you to Rob and Theo and the team at Reset Connect for hosting the session, and to our panellists, Gavin Ellis, Dr. Kate Whitman, Chris Dooley and Fiona Cooper.